Let me guess. You clicked on this video because you fall into one of three categories. Category 1. You sat down at your computer, opened up a Word document, wrote some colorful dialogue between your characters, followed by monotone and bland descriptions of your setting, character, or things within your story. You sat there for a long time trying to figure out why it was so boring, or just lacking in that something that gave it any sort of life. Category 2. You struggle to describe the feelings of your characters and have been afflicted with chronic white room syndrome, which makes it seem as though your manuscript is just a bunch of mouths talking into an empty void. Category 3. You just wanted to see what the I was talking about this time. Well, don't worry, you're in the right place, because in today's video, I'm going to show you how to write powerful and emotionally charged descriptions that will leave your readers feeling as though they didn't just read your book, but that they experienced it. I'm going to be providing examples from my own writing, as well as giving you some examples that you can do to help improve the quality of your descriptions and create a visceral experience for your future readers. Hi, hey, hello there. If you're new here, my name is Charlie. I'm currently on a journey to be traditionally published, and in my pursuit, I have dedicated this channel to my writing goals, tips, and other bookish things. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get to it. Before we jump into my tips and exercises, we need to talk about why description is so important. Description is important for many reasons, but the most important reason is the reader's experience. And so for the purpose of this video, that's what we'll be focused on. Description allows for a reader to transport him or herself into a scene. By providing more sensory details to the reader, us writers can keep the reader's attention for longer, evoke emotions, give clues for what's to come, and hopefully provide an immersive experience that will leave them wanting more. But this could be a double-edged sword. Tell me in the comments how many times you've picked up a book that you were really excited to read, only to be met with paragraph after paragraph of descriptions of textures, the room, just meaningless details that didn't really need to be there. Did you feel immersed in the story, or did you feel bored? The point is, we want to be able to provide the reader with enough detail to know what's happening, what the characters are feeling, and where in the world they are, but not so much that it leaves nothing to the imagination or becomes a chore to read. So how exactly do we do that? First, let's talk about white room syndrome and the opposite of that, cluttered descriptions. White room syndrome is an issue that many writers face when there's a significant lack of setting and description. The reader may know what's going on, but they can't exactly picture where it's happening. I'll give you an example from my own writing. The door swung open and a head of wavy black hair appeared. Her father looked up from his papers, put them in a pile, and locked the bottom drawer. He was sweating. He gestured for the girl to sit across from him. She walked into the room and sat. "You know, Mom and I didn't get that vase for you for it to sit empty all this time," Chrissy said. In this short example, we know that there's a door and a vase, but otherwise the room is pretty much blank and it has no character. To me, this description is boring and bland. We have the basic details of what's going on, but we don't exactly know where it's happening. Aside from that, the reader isn't going to know whether or not this is an old house or a new house, if it's even a house at all, if the items in the house are new or old. We also don't get any sense at all of the story's overall mood. By adding in more details, you can ground your reader in the scene and help them get a picture of what's happening and where. In this case, less is not always more. So what happens if the opposite is true? The door swung open and a head of wavy black hair appeared in the doorway. Chrissy leaned against the door frame, which creaked as she adjusted herself. Her father looked up from his papers, shuffled them into a hurried pile, and locked the bottom drawer of his dark mahogany desk. He was sweating, the collar of his finely pressed shirt collecting it as it rolled down the side of his neck. He gestured for the girl to sit across from him in a large leather chair. The hardwood floors squeaked as she made her way across the room. The cherry finish gleamed underneath the low overhead lights. She eyed the crystal vase that sat empty on the corner of the desk. Her eyes flicked to the wall behind his desk, which had a built-in bookshelf filled with many ornaments and artifacts her father had collected over the years. Some gifts from her mother, others gestures from wealthy clients. Like the heavy jade box with elephants carved into the side, which came from a client who flew all the way from China to meet with him. She loved how heavy it felt in her hands when her father showed it to her for the first time. The lid donned a forest of bamboo with tiny leaves and flowers which bordered every corner. or the snow globe from Russia with an ornate base made from real gold and a tiny nutcracker inside that spun and played the dance of the sugar plum fairies whenever the dial was turned. It had a little light on it that illuminated the inside of the nutcracker's house. That was probably her favorite item in her father's office. She sank into the chair and pulled at a familiar loose thread. You know, Mom and I didn't get that vase for you for it to sit empty all this time, Chrissy said. I won't go on because we'd be here forever, but I think you get the picture. It's too much and it distracts from the overall scene as well. Now, obviously this isn't something that you can write, but I can tell you since I wrote it that basically everything except for the vase has absolutely no significance to this scene whatsoever. And so it's way too many details to be added in. It doesn't matter to the story. We also don't want to bog down the reader with too many details because it takes away from the point of the scene. Not only that, but the reader doesn't really actually want every single tiny detail, and so we shouldn't be giving it to them. We want to leave some things up to the reader's interpretation. Of course, we can always add in more details later as long as it matters to the story. But think of it this way. If it doesn't matter to the story, it doesn't need to be said. If it does matter to the story, then we should be writing it in a way that isn't overdoing it. In this case, sometimes less is more. So let's try this again in the way that I personally would write this. The door swung open and a head of wavy black hair appeared in the doorway. Chrissy leaned against the doorframe, which creaked as she adjusted herself. Her father looked up from his papers, shuffled them into a hurried pile, and locked the bottom drawer of his dark mahogany desk. He was sweating, the collar of his finely pressed shirt collecting it as it rolled down the side of his neck. He gestured for the girl to sit across from him in a large leather chair. The hardwood floor squeaked as she made her way across the room. She eyed the crystal vase that sat empty on the corner of the desk and then sank into the chair and pulled at a familiar loose thread. You know, Mom and I didn't get that vase for you for it to sit empty all this time, Chrissy said. Now we're starting to get a picture of what the room looks like, the items in the room, and even some color and sounds. We also get a sense of the scene's mood without being bogged down in so many unnecessary details that it takes away from the main point. Now, of course, this can be adjusted to contain more details as long as it matters to the story. We can also add in more details as the plot unfolds, add clues and give broader context, and even add in more description of the room's items later down the line. So how do you do this for yourself exactly? I have a couple exercises that I would like for you to try. If you suffer from lack of detail or white room syndrome, then I would like you to pick 2 to 3 items in your room to describe. It could be anything from your desk to your chair, to your bed, to your carpet. Whatever you have available to you will work for this exercise. And then I want you to come up with 3 words to describe them. 1 word for the texture of the item, 1 word for the sound it makes, if any, and 1 word for another detail, and this could be anything from the weight of the item to the color or pattern that it has. If it's your bed, does it creak when you adjust positions? Are your sheets soft? Are they rough from overuse? Is there any patterns like stripes or flowers or even a geometric shape? What color are they? Then I want you to write a paragraph of yourself in your room with 3 to 4 sentences describing what these items are like for you. Be specific in your descriptions, but don't go into too much detail. Try to find that balance. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you suffer from adding in too much detail, take a paragraph that you've already written and ask yourself how much of this is necessary to your story. How much of it is something that your character is noticing? How much of it actually needs to be there? Is that item you're describing important to your story? Is it moving your story forward? If it's not, remove it. Rewrite your paragraph using just bare bone actions that your character is taking. And then add in 2 to 3 details in 2 to 3 sentences describing the room around your character. Try to also incorporate these details with the movement of your character. For example, in the writing sample that I read out to you, the floor creaked as she walked across it. If the details you're writing are important to the story, ask yourself if you can push it to a different paragraph. In the example that I read out to you, the main character sits in the chair. Her father and her have a bit of a chat, and then after a moment he gets up and walks over to a built-in bookcase. You can add in those details after the fact It doesn't need to be all at once. And this is also what I mean by incorporating it into your character's movement. You don't have to have it all in one paragraph. It can be spread out throughout the entirety of your book. If there's a detail in there that you need but isn't necessary right now, you can hold off. You don't have to put that in all at once. You can also try to incorporate those details in dialogue. Using description in that way instead of just paragraph after paragraph of details will help keep your reader more engaged. Now, if none of these things work for you, it is okay to take a step back for a little bit and come back to it later. You don't have to do it all right now. Next, we're going to talk about ways to describe emotions to give your readers a powerful and emotional reading experience. Now, we could just say she was surprised, and this of course could work in some cases. But if you're really trying to immerse your readers in specific feelings that your character is having, if you're trying to give them a visceral reaction to your story, we need to get a little more specific. I really like to incorporate sensations in my writing. I try not to use adjectives to describe emotions whenever I can, whenever it's possible. Of course, feel free to use as many as often as you want to. This is just my personal preference. But if you really want your reader to feel what your character is experiencing, then you can take it up a notch with the next few tips I'm about to give you. Now, this can be done in a variety of ways, some of which we've already talked about, like setting the scene. And it's also a lot to do with word choice, but we can also get into this by describing the feelings your point of view character is having and the bodily sensations that they're having while they're experiencing those emotions. A bad example of this would be, she tossed back a glass of water. Sadness overwhelmed her. She fell to her knees. Surely this would kill her. Tears streamed from her eyes. She couldn't believe this was happening. How could he do this to her? What did you feel there? I can see that she's sad, and of course I feel a little sympathetic for her, but I don't really care that much. It just doesn't hit home for me. That's not exactly what I want my readers to feel, and as bad as this may sound, when I'm writing about a sad scene, I actually want my readers to feel sad. I want them to feel exactly the same way that my character is feeling. Of course, I might feel more sad if I felt connected to the character, but what if I didn't? If I'm not emotionally invested in my character, I'm not going to be invested in the book. I might as well just put it down. So how could we make this even more impactful? I'm going to try this again by adding in a few bodily sensations. A hard lump formed in her throat. She tossed back a glass of water and hoped it would fill her hollowed out chest. The familiar sting of tears prickled behind her eyes. She fell to her knees. Surely this would kill her. She took a deep, ragged breath, and then another. A sob erupted from her mouth, and hot tears poured from her eyes onto the cold tile of the bathroom floor. She couldn't believe this was happening. How could he do this to her? Can you see the difference between those two examples? Can you tell how emotionally charged the second version was compared to the first version? This is what I mean when I say creating a visceral response. Think of it this way. If you don't cry while you're writing a scene, the reader probably won't either. If you can't feel it, the reader definitely won't. And if they can't connect to the character's emotions, they probably won't be able to connect to the character either. Now, how can you connect this to your own writing? I'll tell you how I do this in my own writing. First, I like to start by imagining the scene in my mind, picturing what I want to happen, how my character will probably feel during this experience based off of her motivations and what she wants. And then I'll try to figure out how I felt the last time I had that same emotion. So for example, sadness. I will picture what that felt like for me. I will remember all of the bodily sensations that I had. Did I feel like I was hyperventilating? What was the exact sensation? I'll then pick a few of those things that I can incorporate into the scene and create an emotionally charged description of my character's feelings. If you have a hard time visually picturing things, but you know the type of emotion you're going for, write down the specific bodily sensations you had when you were feeling that way. You can also ask others what kind of sensations they have when they feel a certain way. Alternatively, you can journal about specific emotions as you're having them. I find this method works best when I'm having an emotion that I don't have often. Just make sure that you're writing down the bodily sensations as well and not just why you're feeling what you're feeling. Both are important, but we just want to know what those sensations are. So that's it. We've talked about white room syndrome, about not being detailed enough, about being way too detailed, and about how to find a good balance. We've also talked about ways to describe emotions in a raw and impactful way, and I gave you some exercises that you can try when you're feeling a bit stuck. What we didn't cover in this video were the 5 senses, and personally I think that this requires its own video, and I could probably have a video dedicated to each of the senses. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that from me in the future. Please tell me what you think about my process and how I navigate descriptions in the comments. I would love to hear if this helped you in any way as well. In the next video, we're going to be talking about how I create dynamic characters. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!